Hi, this is Paul. A couple days ago, as is I get up in the morning with my wife and we talk and do a few things, and she gets ready for work, and I take care of the dog, and she goes to work, and then I have a few chores to do around the house, and so I'm like, oh, let's open up YouTube and see what's there. And this video from Speak Life comes up, and it's like, I didn't even know there was a new trigonometry conversation with Richard Dawkins. Nobody said anything about it. And it starts with this banger.
Do you believe that we have free will?
I hate that question.
I hate that question. Why?
Free will is an illusion, but it's a very, very powerful illusion. And we all feel as if we've got free will.
So you believe that the question I'm asking you now and the answer you're giving me now is predetermined?
I'm afraid I do, and I find that very hard to stomach.
What it may invalidate is the idea that all there is to understanding the world is the scientific method.
Brilliantly put.
I don't.
Does that make sense?
Not really.
No?
It's hard for me to quite follow that. What other view than the scientific worldview might you be erecting?
He can't think.
Whatever it is that makes us experientially know that we have choice.
You're asking the wrong person.
No, I don't believe I am, actually. I don't believe I am at all.
Hi, I'm Glenn from Speak Life. We'd like to see.
And there's an introduction to a video. Maybe I need to start editing and doing introductions to video, because that introduction grabbed me right away. And what grabbed me was basically Konstantin Kissin put into Richard Dawkins' lap an observation that C.S. Lewis had made, that Alvin Plantinga had made, that basically free will basically goes like this. We look at the evidence and we freely choose the right thing. The entire conversation about facts and logic and science and testing and evidence is all built on a tiny little narrative that we are going to be faced with a decision between two or multiple things, and based on a certain degree of evidence, we can choose the right thing. Dawkins, just a few minutes before, had said, well, there's no free will. It's all determined what we say. And what that means is, which Lewis and Alvin Plantinga both walked through very slowly in intricate detail, means there can be no science if this is actually the story of us. In that, whether you're a crazy woo-woo person over here who is just talking about feelings or what I think, or someone over there, I'm gonna have to get a screenshot of this here. You don't choose the right answer. The answer that you give has been predetermined, and whether you're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It's just coming out of your mouth. And so, Kissin nails him on this, and so then it was like, wow, I got to watch this video, and I am a quarter of the way through. I haven't finished Peugeot's Miracle video. I haven't really finished the Eric Weinstein, Chris Williamson Miracle. I heard about the What If Alt History guy did a conversation with Chris Williamson. I thought, oh, I want to see that, because I've always been curious about who's the kid behind that channel, because I've watched a bunch of the videos. I haven't done much commentary on him. Satori used him, heavily for the Boomerology video, and so... And then the Jordan Peterson video that Aaron mentioned in the Friday morning live stream, I haven't watched that, so I'm way, way, way behind on video content. Plus, all the stuff that happens in the corner, the nominalism video, and of course Nathan Jacobs continues to put out videos, and I'm way, way behind in him. But anyway, this video sort of shot up to the top of my salience hierarchy. I didn't know Richard Dawkins came out with a new book. And usually what happens in sort of the the YouTube circuit, is that when one of these guys writes a book, then he's going to go on all the shows. But of course, they're not just going to talk about the book. The publishers will send books to all of these people, but they're going to want to ask all of the sort of gotcha questions that are going to run up the algorithm and get the good videos out there. Now, I haven't even finished Glenn's video on this. And so, of course, I'll put the links to this below. So go ahead and watch Glenn's video. And, I'm not even in the picture again. Here I am. So, yeah. So then it was like, oh, boy, I really got to watch. I really got to watch the original conversation. And there's even more stuff in here. Even without the Lewis Plantinga demonstration that this vision of science undercuts, as the noisy motorcycle goes by, this vision of science undercuts science itself, which again, Lewis and Plantinga and a good number of philosophers have made that observation for a very long time. And actually the complete inability to understand it. Maybe that's in Dawkins' favor. But again, as Lewis pointed out again and again in how many books, people can't stick to it. And Dawkins pretty much says it. Yeah, nobody can live like this, but that's the way we believe it is. And then Kissinger just sort of keeps after him and says, then what's the point of this worldview that no one can live? But so there's the book, apparently, Richard Dawkins, The Genetic Book. And one of the things that struck me as I was going through this was I've watched way too much Michael Levin on Karen's channel, The Meaning Code, to know about electroceuticals and know the fact that these flatworms that can be genetically identical can have different heads on them. And so part of what's happened in the last little while is that we've begun to notice that genetics isn't all we thought it was. Now there's sort of the electrical systems of these cells that are determining what's going on. And then there's the epigenetics, and I'm not a biologist, but I've seen enough YouTube to know, yeah, people are learning a lot of stuff. And then I heard him say this in the conversation, which really shocked me.
About it has impact. One of the things you've been instrumental of your entire career is the popularization of evolutionary theory, giving people answers to questions they might have once had about evolution, etc. How far have we moved over your lifetime, over the course of your work, in terms of understanding human evolution and evolution of other animals, of the entire animal kingdom?
How far have I moved?
No, we as a society, how far has our understanding moved? Are there still unanswered questions, for example?
Yes.
And what are they?
Well, for example, the origin of the whole thing. How did it get started? The origin of life. That's a big unanswered question.
There's Richard Dawkins. He said it. The origin of the whole thing. And then you might think, okay, the Big Bang, physics. No. He's not talking about that. The origin of life. And again, there's just a tremendous amount of hand waving that I find in conversations about this, that people are all over saying, oh, we all know where life comes from. A month or so ago, someone sent me to this video, which I found absolutely fascinating, with Stephen Meyer and James Tour. Now, of course, Meyer's been on Rogan, and his arguments are very compelling. Has he been with Peterson? I think so. But James Tour, too, who is a biochemist. James Tour, I subscribed to his YouTube channel when it was really, really tiny. And he's just a lot of fun to watch. But, you know, Richard Dawkins is basically saying, yeah, we really don't know. I'll just let Stephen Meyer say it.
Also worked on the history of that field. Had a well-known quotation. She said that behind the question of the origin of life is a deeper question, and that is the question of what are we trying to explain the origin of? And in 1859, in the 1860s, 1870s, the scientists, early evolutionary biologists assumed that question was going to be pretty simple and easy to understand. Thomas Henry
And they
Huxley.
assumed that why?
They assumed it because they thought life was very simple. Thomas Henry Huxley, who was Darwin's famous bulldog, said that the cell was a simple, homogeneous globule of undifferentiated protoplasm. And they thought that life was essentially a kind of chemical, it was made of an essential substance called protoplasm, which was a kind of jello or goo that could be produced by a few simple chemical reactions. And our knowledge of what the simple cell is actually composed of, as Jim has just said, has advanced massively since then. Huxley had no idea, Darwin had no idea what we would discover. And now we know that inside living cells, we have at the very least an information storage, transmission, and processing system, which is part of a whole automated system for building proteins and protein machines. These nano machines that Jim makes, as you correctly point out, are as he puts it, child's play. He has these massive chemical recipes that are involved, multiple steps, interventions, and manipulations to build the much simpler miniature machines that he can build. They're much simpler than the ones that are found inside cells. And so the problem has, as he puts it, it's receded off into the distance because our knowledge of the complexity of life has meant that it's much, much harder to envision how that might have arisen by a series of undirected chemical processes.
Reading your work, Steve, if I understand it correctly, there's a big moment, and funnily enough, the big moment happens at about the same time as the Urey Miller experiments, and that big moment is Watson and Crick in 1953, and you get the double helix, they understand the structure of DNA, and suddenly they can see how complicated DNA is. And every living cell, first of all, I want to make sure I get this right, every living cell contains DNA, is this correct?
DNA,
okay.
RNA, proteins.
So a few quotations that you present in your book, Signature in the Cell. Bill Gates, DNA is like a computer program. Biotechnologist Leroy Hood, DNA represents, quote, digital code. Richard Dawkins himself, the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like, close quote.
And he basically, Dawkins will say pretty much that in the Constantine-Kissin and the trigonometry interview.
So doesn't this pose just a gigantic new problem? Again, let Stephen Jay Gould and whatever they want to argue about evolution, we are concerned with this first box, and it's still empty. And the first box is the first life.
Yeah,
and not only is it empty, but Tour comes along and says, oh, you have no idea. The simplest forms of life require such complex chemistry. It is and then Meyer comes along and says, well, wait a minute, fellows, what about Watson and Crick? Every cell contains DNA, and you're not going to create a 3 billion item long strand of DNA with hitting ammonia with lightning, no matter how many times you do the experiment. Is that not correct?
Well, right.
This empty box is now
a couple of
a
things.
source of awe, really, right?
Exactly. If we go back to the Miller-Urey experiment, there's two big classes of problems. One is that they synthesize the amino acids using alleged prebiotic gases. They synthesize it based on gases in those flasks that don't simulate the actual atmosphere on the early Earth. But secondly, the amino acids that they produced were a mixture, and there was a mixture of all kinds of other things that had to be eliminated for those amino acids to hook up in a way that would be life-friendly. But they also didn't explain how they would hook up and how they would hook up in the precise sequence to actually form proteins. So it's like it's the difference between letters and words that mean something. You have a bag of Scrabble letters and you dump them on the table. That does not give you a triple word score in the game, okay? Right. But the Watson and Crick discovery is seminal, but it's the beginning of a whole series of discoveries in what historians of biology now call the molecular biological revolution. In 1953, Watson and Crick elucidate the double helical structure of the DNA molecule. Right. But then 5 years later, Francis Crick, who was a code breaker in World War II, realizes that the subunits along the spine of the DNA molecule are functioning like alphabetic characters in a written text or like the digital characters in a section of software. In fact, George Gamow, one of the great physicists of the time, realized very quickly that the string of A's, G's, and T's along the spine of the DNA could be represented as, readily represented as a digital bit string. And so what you have, and what Crick realizes, he calls this the sequence hypothesis, is that DNA contains information for the construction of the proteins and protein machines that are needed to keep cells alive. So it's very much like our modern CAD/CAM technology that's used in say, a Boeing plant, where an engineer will sit at a console, write some code. The code is then translated into another machine code that can direct the function of a manufacturing apparatus. So maybe at Boeing, the code from the engineer would put the rivets on the airplane wing in just the right place. Or younger people are aware of these 3D printers, yes, where we have digital information directing the construction of three-dimensional mechanical or other structures. That's what's actually going on inside cells. It's not just that there's code, it's code that's directing the production of three-dimensional proteins and protein machines that are absolutely essential for everything the cell does.
So even the simplest cell contains DNA, and DNA turns out, and even, I presume I'm putting it correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, even the simplest DNA turns out to be a fantastically complicated and sophisticated instruction manual.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. For building very specific things that are needed to keep living cells alive.
Okay. So, if you believe, as Darwin believed, that the first life was a blob of jello, maybe you have pictures in your mind that suggest that you can get that out of primordial soup.
They just weren't that worried about the problem in the 1870s because they had a false idea of how simple life was. They thought a couple of reactions they'd figured out. But now you've got to figure out
now
the
origin. Now they have DNA.
Yeah.
How do you get that out of the primordial soup?
Right.
Why hasn't why hasn't the whole scientific establishment said, stop presses,
We're
fellas,
in trouble.
we have a
yeah,
problem?
Yeah.
Isn't
That's what I've said. I said time out. I had a whole article called Time Out. I mean, you're sensing the frustration. Welcome to my world. I mean, this is the problem. This is the problem. None of this works. It's a bunch of science fiction. It's really nonsense what these guys are putting forward. And they're building their careers around this thing, and money continues to this day. 40 million euros was just designated to, in 10 years, figure out where life came from. And there's about 40 researchers that in Europe that are going to try to do this. It's really nonsense. We don't even know where to begin. We don't know how to take the simple building blocks. What they're going to end up doing, and I'll make a prediction right here, what they're going to end up doing is something that's analogous to what Craig Venter has already done. They're going to take a living cell and they're going to knock some parts out of it and then put the parts back in that they knocked out and said, hey, look, we made life. You didn't make life. You started with a living cell. I mean, this is what they're going to...
You started with a car, you took the carburetor out of one car and put a carburetor from another car in and said, hey, look, we made a car.
Because they're not going to know where to begin. There's so many problems. It's not just 5 problems. I talk about 5 problems because these are 5 you're going to have to solve, but that's 5 of 5,000 that are facing you that just to begin. None of these do we know how to make the polymers. None of these do we know how to assemble them. We're just lost on every phase. It is a big scam.
One more question. Jim, I'm going to quote you again. I'm quoting your article. Imagine that the world's best synthetic chemists, biochemists, and evolutionary biologists have got combined forces to form a team, a dream team. Money is no object. They have at their disposal the most advanced analytical facilities, the complete scientific literature, synthetic and natural coupling agents, and all the reagents their hearts might desire. They have a lot of things I don't even understand, but they have it all.
They have it all.
Carbohydrates, lipids, amino acids, and nucleic acids are stored in their laboratories in a state of 100% purity. Would the dream team, I'm continuing to quote Dr. Tour, would the dream team please assemble a living system? Take your time, folks. Take a few billion years. Nothing? Well. Okay, Jim. This expresses your frustration. I get that. But there's one piece of this that still puzzles me. You say take a few billion years. Isn't that still the argument? That if you give it enough time, somehow or other, it's an immensely complex procedure, but if you give it enough time, enough shocks of lightning, maybe we can't do it in a lab, but the real lab had billions of years at it. What about the element of time?
Time is your enemy.
Enemy?
Time is your enemy. Yes, because those organic
In the 50s, George Wald, famous scientist who worked on the origin of life problem, said that time was the hero of the plot.
Right.
Give it enough time that what's improbable will become inevitable. But Jim has
I'm perfect for you because I was using old textbooks in high school that were probably printed in the
Well, we
50s.
all still get
this
this.
is what's
we
in my
get
head.
this. Yeah, same stuff.
So the compounds decompose. All those beautiful chemicals that they have stored in their labs in 100% purity, after a few years, they're not 100% purity. In fact, the RNA, after a few weeks, has undergone significant degradation. So the whole idea is that, oh, well, somehow one RNA formed and then it took off. If you have one RNA molecule, if you figure the half-life of RNA may be a month in water, you have to change that to a probability. That one molecule has a few hours to survive. It doesn't survive. Just like your pharmaceuticals, it says don't take this after 1 year. Now you want to wait billions of years and see what it's going to become? Everything goes bad with time. These are not even stored in very, very strict conditions, but even if they are, there's always a degradation rate. So time is your enemy. So if you happen to have all of those chemicals, they're all going to go bad. Your time is your enemy. It's the enemy of being able to do these things. In fact, every organic chemist knows this. If they go home for the weekend without treating their compounds properly and bringing them on to a stable state, they come back after the weekend and it's fallen apart. I mean, you pay the price for this sort of thing. So you don't have the time. Time's your
In
enemy.
these Miller-Urey type experiments, there's a problem called interfering cross reactions, where you get, yes, 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 protein-forming amino acids, but there's all kinds of other chemical compounds that are also synthesized in those same experiments, and they will quickly react with the things you want and form, in the case of the Miller-Urey experiment, the sludge was called melanoidin, and it's moving in a life-unfriendly direction. So what the chemist has to do is effectively intervene to remove the byproducts that are unwanted to allow only the things that are wanted to continue on in the simulation. But that's
The chemist has to play God, which is cheating.
God, exactly. It's an intelligent intervention, and therefore not a simulation of an undirected chemical evolutionary process.
I saw this a few weeks ago, and it was just like, wow, there's so much fudging going on. There's just so much fudging going on. We have no idea, and yet we just sort of talk like, oh yeah, we know where it all comes from. And this is actually a second take of this. I haven't even gotten too far into this, far enough to get into, what Glenn was getting at here. And again, just listen to how this opens.
The question I'm asking, do you believe that we have free will?
I hate that question.
I hate that question. Why?
Free will is an illusion, but it's a very, very powerful illusion. And we all feel as if we've got free will.
So you believe that the question I'm asking you now and the answer you're giving me now is predetermined?
I'm afraid I do, and I find that very hard to stomach.
What it may invalidate is the idea that all there is to understanding the world is the scientific method.
Brilliantly put.
I don't
Does that make
think-
sense?
Not really.
No?
It's hard for me to quite follow that. What other view than the scientific worldview might you be erecting?
He can't think.
Whatever it is that makes us experientially know that we have choice. 'Cause
You're
I'm trying
asking
to-
the wrong person.
No, I don't believe I am, actually. I don't believe I am at all.
Hi, I'm Glenn from Speak Life. We'd like to...
And so, yeah, it's you line these up, and it's like, and in all fairness to Dawkins, he's honest. He says, "Yeah, we don't know where life comes from. we struggle to define it." And what was interesting,
between the gap between purpose and reality, and how that finds its reflection in death. in the different levels of death. Okay.
Sure. I mean, my listeners might take issue with the word purpose there, and I mean, you'll probably think that there is an ordained purpose for things, but I don't think you have to understand what you're saying. You could
You
think
don't
of the
need an
purpose of a
ordained
table.
purpose to understand what I'm saying. Like animals
think-
have
yeah,
a
think
are
of-
autopoetic, and a rock is not autopoetic, right? An animal
There are
acts
just things
towards
that
its
they
preservation.
do sort of move towards, like in the way that a table has the purpose of holding things up. Regardless of where it gets that, there's sort of you could take all the parts of a table, and if they were no longer working together to hold things up, it just wouldn't be a
Be a
live table anymore, you know.
Yeah, and that's especially true for living beings, because living beings fight entropy in ways that normal things don't. There's a weird thing that living beings actually do act to preserve themselves, act towards purposes. They gather their being together towards for reasons, whatever reason that is. Right? Even if we could talk about what is the best reason at a second level, but at the first level we see that, but what that requires is the gathering of multiplicity into one. That's what it is. It's like, you have a bunch of stuff, and then that stuff is aligned, and now it's moving towards a purpose. That's what's described in Genesis when God gathers dust together and then blows spirit into it. Because dust is a bunch of things that have no relation with each other. That's what dust is. It's like a bunch of stuff that it doesn't have a commonality. So you gather it together, you put a reason in it, you put something invisible that can't be accounted for with the stuff, and then you have a living being.
Can't be accounted for materially. Can't be accounted for in terms of material cause and effect.
Right. And so death is when that stops, or when that goes away, or when you act against it, or when, so it's like sin and death are related to each other because they are the manner in which we don't align ourselves with purposes, and we can experience that gap, right, between purpose and the things that's happening.
Sure.
And so,
okay, so this is an idea of what death is.
Yeah, well, it's important to understand what death is, because when we don't understand what death is, we look at the text and we say, oh, they didn't die. Well, it's like, what does it mean to die?
Sure,
it's not,
right.
We don't have good definitions for things. And so that is the first thing that's important to kind of understand, right? And so let's start with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? I really think that
all right, so this video is there too, and it's linked to below. But like I said, there's tons of good stuff going, and what do I do in my channel? I have all of these videos that I'm watching out there, and it's like, oh yeah, this one and this one and this one, and let's put them together. And then what story does this tell? And what things does this make us doubt? And what things does this suggest, or at least enliven and support in us? So anyway, leave a comment. Let me know what you think.